Hey everyone, my name's Kelvin and welcome back to another watercolor tutorial for Procreate. So in today's video, I'm going to show you my technique for painting these really simple Cosmo flowers. And the process here is definitely suitable for beginners, but I think it might also be really insightful for some of you more advanced painters. And that's because I'm going to show off a little selection trick that might help you with painting layered flower petals in general. So I've already got a watercolor paper texture loaded into Procreate. And in this case, I'm using the Forster watercolor paper texture. And for the brushes, I'm going to be able to do all of this with the brushes in the regular watercolor kit. And as usual, I'll put links to everything I use in the description below. I've already got a sketch sort of loaded in here as well. And all it is, it's just a JPEG image that I've placed in here. And you guys can have this one for free. I'll also put a download link for this in the description as well. Now in the layers panel, you can see I've placed this sketch up here as the very top layer. Then I set the transparency mode to multiply, and that's just so it doesn't cover up what we're painting, because from now on, we're going to be painting on a blank layer underneath the paper texture, just like you normally would. So to start painting, I'm just going to grab a kind of medium pink color, and if you imagine the flower, how it has highlights and shadows, the color that I want to start with is right in between there. It's just the midtones of the flower. And for the brush, I'm just going to start with the abstract round brush from the regular watercolor kit. So if we zoom in on this Cosmo, you can see that it has 8 petals. And I don't know if that's like scientifically accurate, but a flower with an even number of petals is very, very easy to paint because how the petals overlap is very simple. And in this case, they're just sort of alternating. So if we look, there are these 4 petals that are in the front. And then these ones in the back, that's 4 more, and I'm going to call those the back petals. And so I'm going to use that kind of terminology, not very scientific, but we're going to start by painting the front petals. So maybe around 20 or 25% size. I'm just going to start by going down the center of the petal like this. Then I'm going to go along the edges and just fill in any of the other blank spots. Now where the brush strokes are overlapping, it's creating a little bit of a dark line, and that's on purpose. And if you've seen these Cosmo flowers, you'll know that that's sort of a characteristic of the petals, and this is just an easy way to get that sort of texture. Now I'm going to go through and do this same process to the remaining 3 front petals. So after the front petals are done, I can move on and do the back petals. And I'm going to use the selection tool to help me, because if I just paint them the same way I did the front petals, there's going to be an overlap in this area. So I'm going to grab the selection tool and set it to freehand. And I'll just make a selection way out here. But as I approach the flower petals, I'll try to follow them kind of as close as I can, but it really doesn't have to be perfect. Just like that. And then I'll reconnect it. Now when I grab the brush again, it's got the same color, same brush I did the front ones with, and I'm just going to do them the same way. And after that, I'll deselect it, and you can see how that selection sort of prevented this petal from overlapping the front petal. And this is how we can paint this flower from front to back and keep this kind of layering effect while still painting on one layer. And I'm just going to go and continue with the same process on the remaining 4 back petals. So those petals are all done for now, and while I have the same brush and the same color still selected, I'll just quickly fill out the bud over here. Now there isn't a lot of contrast between the front petals and the back petals, so we're going to add some shadows to kind of bring out that depth. So if I zoom in on one of the back petals as an example, I'm going to grab the selection tool and set it to freehand just like I did before. And I'm going to make a selection just along the edge there. Then I'm going to go to add and make another selection on the other side of the back petal. Now when I go to hue, saturation, and brightness, I can just lower the brightness And basically by adding a shadow along the edge there, we make the back petal look like it really is in the back. So you can kind of see what that might look like. And I'm just going to continue with that technique on the remaining 3 back petals. And just to finish up the shadows, I'll add a small shadow on the bud as well. Now after the shadows are all done, I'm going to move on and do the highlights. And they're done very similarly, so I'm going to grab the selection tool again. It's still set to freehand. And basically on each of these flower petals, I'm going to draw a box. Then I'm going to do add and draw another box. And I'm just going to continue on with all 8 flower petals and just draw a little box in a different location. So it's a little bit hard to see, but I've got 8 boxes active here. They're active selections. And then I'm going to go to feather, and this will let me feather all of these selections at the same time. And I'm going to feather them quite a bit, maybe around 15 or 20%. Then I'm going to go to my adjustments, and I'm going to go to curves for the layer. And I'm just going to grab this bottom node here, and I'm going to raise it up. And this is going to raise the brightness and add a highlight in a very, very even way. So I think I'll set it to about like that. That looks pretty good. The reason I used curves instead of the brightness, hue, and saturation adjustment is because the curves will brighten things in a much more even and balanced way. The brightness slider, in my experience, it has a tendency to sort of blow out the colors and create these weird I guess like burned colors or something. I'm not really sure why it does that, but the curves tool is definitely going to produce much smoother results. Now before I forget it, I'm going to add a little bit of a highlight to the bud, basically the same process. Now not all Cosmos have this, but I did see a few varieties that have this kind of ombre look, I guess. So I'm going to add it to this one, and basically I'm going to make a sort of color shift in the center. So I'm going to grab the selection tool again, still set to freehand, and I'm going to make a big circular selection in the middle of that flower. Then I'm going to feather it out quite a bit. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'm just going to shift the hue and find a kind of interesting secondary color. I think something like that looks pretty good, but it does look too saturated to my eyes, so I'm going to desaturate it a little bit and maybe brighten it a little bit as well. And just for now, I'll switch off the sketch just so we can get a better look at what we're painting here. And often I notice with digital painting in general, because you can select exact colors and the colors are very consistent while you're painting, things can look a little bit unnaturally perfect. So in quite a few cases, I like to add this kind of random color variation effect. So to do that, I'm going to grab the selection tool again. It's still set to freehand, and I'm just going to select a couple of these flower petals, more or less randomly. Then all those selections, I'll feather them out at the same time, maybe around 20%. Then I'm going to go to hue, saturation, and brightness again. And I'm going to raise the brightness just a little bit, maybe desaturate it, and then shift the hue just a tiny bit. And it might be hard to see this on camera, but there's a very subtle kind of variation in the different hues of this flower, and it makes it look a lot more natural. Next, I can move on and do the center of this flower, and I'm going to do that on a different layer, so I'm going to make a new layer above everything. And for the color, I'm going to grab a pretty bright yellow color, kind of an orangey yellow. And for the brush, I'm going to use the fine liner pen, and I'm just going to fill out this. It's just a circle, and I'm going to change the color very slightly a couple of times just to get some kind of interesting variation there as well. And once I'm happy with the kind of level of color and texture going on there in the center, I like to go over it again with some almost pure white, and it just adds a little bit of a highlight and makes it pop. So the center is all done, and I'm going to turn the sketch back on so I can see what I've got to paint next. And all the stems and leaves are really simple, but I am going to do those on their own layer, so I'll make a new layer. And for the color, I think I'll use a kind of medium olivey green tone. And then for the brush, I'm going to use the abstract round again, but this time at a little bit of a smaller size than I did the flower petals with. And I'm just going to quickly fill out all these stems and leaves. So after all the stems and leaves are filled in, I'm going to turn off the sketch once again. I think I really don't need the sketch anymore. And I'm just going to add a couple of shadows. So I'm going to do that with the selection tool set to freehand. And I'll just make a selection that just covers that area. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness and just darken it a little bit. And I'll do the same thing up at the top. And just to make the leaves a little bit more interesting, I'm going to make a couple of these random freehand selections like this. I'll feather all of those out quite a bit. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness. I'll darken them, saturate them, and then shift the hue just to find a kind of interesting secondary tone in there. And that's just to make these leaves a little bit more interesting. And as a final step here, I'll just merge all the layers for the flower together onto one layer. Then I'm going to grab the water blender brush at the bottom, and at a really small size, I'm just going to go in there and kind of blend just in a handful of random areas. I don't want to get too carried away and make everything smooth, but in areas like this, it would make sense that there's a little bit of blending going on. And I'm just going to go through and add blending wherever I think it looks right. And there we go, this one is all done, and here's what it looks like when I print it out. So I've been painting Cosmo flowers for about a week now, and I kept running into this problem that you might be able to relate to. Sometimes my paintings end up becoming like extremely complicated and I need to use tons and tons of layers. So when that starts to happen, it usually just means that I need to start over and try to paint it again in as few strokes as possible. I think this helps because it's forcing me to focus on simplifying the subject into a handful of these simple shapes. And if the simple shapes are done right, the details really don't matter very much, and I have much more fun when I paint this way. I think this definitely comes across, at least this emotion sort of comes across in the final painting, because when I do it this way, I definitely can tell that my paintings end up looking a lot more spontaneous and a lot more relaxed looking. And with that, I think that pretty much wraps it up. As always, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.